Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great GM. Well, I am back from my USA experience of amazement, delight, wonderment, shock, awe, and, well, absolute fun. And I thought that since this week is my first week back here home, straight into the heat, the summer of Africa, that I would reflect back on my time in the US and to unpack a little bit of the role-playing wonder that I had whilst there. Before I start, though, I have to do a shout-out to Mark and Patty from San Diego, to Patrick and Sophia, and Satine and Ruti from Los Angeles, and to Mike, Eric, and Hernan from St. Paul, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities in Minnesota, for being absolutely phenomenal in hosting me and embracing my journey and for making it truly, truly, truly memorable. The funniest thing was that after San Diego, my host said, well, you've got the best American experience now, the rest of your trip is going to be downhill. And then Los Angeles turned out to be this completely different experience, which was absolutely fantastic. And they said, oh, well, we've set the bar now. And then I get to St. Paul and the bar is set even higher. And then I get to New York and the bar is set even higher then. So it was an absolute, absolute joy. Now to the role playing itself. And what I wanted to do was unpack each of the experiences that I had and look at it in terms of how it applies to you, so there is actual value in this video and it's not just me going on about how much fun I had. So to start it off, one of the interesting things was that everyone that was there said, oh no, we want you to play, we don't want you to run a game, you do that all the time, just relax and have fun. If that was your subtle way of saying that you're a terrible GM and you should stick to playing, well, it worked. I played, of the many games that I played, in 3 of them I was a player and had so much fun doing it that I might just want to do it again. Anyway, so the first game that I played in Los Angeles, I played the role of an NPC succubus who was on a path to redemption. She was trying to help out a party who were in a rather precarious situation and ran the risk every time she saw demons doing macabre and dastardly things of converting back to the dark side. Now, what made it interesting was that I had a telepathic link to one of the other characters in the party, and for the majority of the session we were actually in very separate areas. The DM had put me in the area that the players were going to go to, but the players were 40 miles away, or a day's travel away, and the idea was that as the session began, they would continue on their journey down south to join me at the cave entrance to where this rather horrific act of converting a human into a demon was taking place. Players being players, however, and the party decided no, heading south was the completely wrong thing to do. They were going to head back to town. And of course that effectively kept the party split for almost the majority of the game. However, with that telepathic link, at no point was the GM having to bounce between my character 40 miles south and their characters in the north and in the city, because I could interact via this telepathic link. Now, one of the things that I decided was that traditionally all the players sit around the table and will say, well, telepathically I connect with you and I tell you the following, blah, blah, blah. But everybody at the table can hear it, and then it's just taken that the individual who was being sent the message telepathically has shared it with everyone. I felt, though, given the nature of the information that I was going to be giving out to the player, that it was important for the player to get it and then interpret it and share it out with the rest of the group. And I'm so glad that that was allowed to happen. Now, before I before I engaged in this particular type of telepathy, I asked the player permission to be able to whisper very closely into his ear, to which the fool said, yes, of course. So he had me for the better part of 3 hours whispering into his ear. Now, the whole idea of a succubus is that there is a large sexual component to their nature, and of course this character, who was on a path of redemption, was witnessing the demonic torture of this human. And she was becoming more and more and more and more excited by seeing this flesh being ripped from the body, and oh, the screams are so, oh, I can hear, I can sense, I want to be part. So this poor succubus was just getting more and more involved in the scene. Now, I was whispering intentionally softly into the poor player's ear, but gesticulating and being my usual animated self. The rest of the players couldn't hear what I was saying, but they could certainly see me going through the motions of this almost orgasmic-like experience. The player had the good sense to get my character to leave that space for her own safety, of course. But when it came time for him to then relay the information onto the rest of the party, well, let's just say that he left out some important pieces, either by choice or simply by being overwhelmed by this hairy man busy going off in his ear, or simply by fact of decision that his character wasn't going to share what was happening. The net result was that the rest of the players saw this thing happening, knew that it was happening, but just didn't know what was actually being communicated. And it was absolutely fantastic because the GM as well didn't really know what was going on. Now, he had prepped me beforehand saying, well, this is the information that you're going to have, and these are the points that we think you should go through, and this is generally the plan for the session. Of course, the session didn't go as according to plan, and they very seldom do. So the interesting thing about that whole experience, however, was that the players responded with this unknown information in a very different way to the way that they might have if they had heard the information coming directly from me and then had to metagame and think that their characters hadn't heard it. Anyway, I have no idea what happened afterwards because we ran out of time with the session and they moved on. But the player, whilst I was whispering in his ear, found it very difficult to focus on what was happening around him. And oftentimes his fellow players would say, "Are you listening to us? Where are you?" And there's me whispering in his ear. Again, the result was a very visceral experience of this telepathic link, this extra voice in the person's head mingled with reality. So it made it a much, much more interesting experience, and I believe everyone had a lot of fun. So from a sex-starved succubus, I then went on to be featured as a guest in the very, very entertaining Maze Arcana show on the D&D Twitch channel, run by Rooty and with Satine in tow, doing a fantastic, fantastic game and a wonderful show. And there the players and I had the wonderful afternoon of role-playing together. Now, we didn't have a lot of time in terms of character prep, and we spent too much time getting to know one another and chatting and swapping and sharing stories, until suddenly we had to be on air. So my character, when I sat down at the table, had no backstory, had no real plan. It was just a generic elvish thief that we'd sort of come up with. So what I needed to do was figure out how to give him some kind of personality, because otherwise he's just going to be a thief. And I thought, well, thieves are fairly one-dimensional if they're just trying to steal stuff. So what's his mode? What's his thing that's going to make him stand out? And I don't know if this would work for a long-term campaign or not, and I suspect that maybe it would get a little bit tiring after a while, but this was a one-shot. I knew that I was there as a guest player. My character was going to pop in and have an adventure and then pop out again, and maybe in the distant future rejoin them at some point. But for now, it was a short session. So, whilst my character woke up in his room with 3 chests, he didn't really know what to do. Neither did the player. So the rest of the guys are busy playing, and they've been playing together for many months and years, and as a matter of fact. And so they were going through the paces. Now, I was struggling, I admit, to trying to figure out what to do with this elf. And then I had the idea that perhaps this elf is not your traditional thief. Perhaps he's a thief who gets other people to help him steal things. And he does so by being a bit of a con man. So thankfully I had a decent charisma. We were playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, by the way, and so was able to pull off my trick, which was to effectively tie himself up whenever he thought that he was in a losing position. He would then pretend to be the victim of whomever owned the facility or was in the space, and would cajole those who came as their and laud them as his rescuers. Then he would spin some tale and get them to help him steal items and things at his leisure. So that's exactly what he did. And the poor Maze Arcana team was faced by this very nervous elf who appeared to have been abducted. Then, as the story unfolded, and Ruti, as an amazing GM, started to spin the tale and turn the tables, which I particularly enjoyed, the wild lies that this elf was telling to get the Maze Arcana team to join him started to suddenly come true. However, at the very end, after having tied and gagged himself up multiple times throughout the adventure, when the elf eventually manages to slip his hand inside the chest, well, you'll just have to go and watch it. If you head on over to twitch.tv and you type in /D&D, you can go and find the Maze Arcana stream there. I think it's still on, and that's from the second to last weekend of October. Anyway, the outcome was, I find, as a GM and as a player, particularly wonderful, because it brought this arc into a close, it wrapped it up, and it wrapped the character up and put him in a situation where he could conceivably come back from wherever it is that he ended up, or not. It just depends on whether I ever get back to Los Angeles and invited back onto the Maze Arcana group. So that was a lot of fun, and for me, what was interesting there was trying to figure out how this character would work in the short term and then slowly develop the character over time. So quite a different approach to having a pre-generated character with reams and reams and reams of history. Anyway, so that was an interesting experience. From there, I flew from the exceptionally hot Los Angeles to St. Paul and snow. It was quite spectacular, and you will see a video coming out that details my experience in snow. Anyway, that's a whole nother video and a whole nother story. In St. Paul, however, I was treated to a spectacular display of minifigs and set pieces of terrain that had been crafted by Mike, and his passion for the hobby is absolutely evident. Now, here again, I was a guest NPC, but with two other fans of the channel, one of whom had driven for 4 hours to join us, and the three of us had barely met each other. We'd had lunch before we started playing, and, well, basically sat down and started to play. Now, we were given 3 pre-generated NPCs that were effectively there to just help the party through a particularly tricky situation. They had to go and pick some mushrooms. Now, of course, as the adventure continued, we discovered that the mushrooms were inside a cave, and the cave was overrun by goblins. So the party needed help. We were only level 3, also playing D&D 5th edition. So as the story progresses, the three of us, the 3 guests in this group, the others had been playing for quite some time, but the 3 of us with these NPCs started to form a very interesting relationship. Although it didn't specifically state that we had or had not known each other beforehand, it did indicate that we were all from the same town. And we decided, literally as the game was progressing, and it wasn't discussed, it just sort of happened, that we were an adventuring party. And what started to emerge was that my character, which was this very Billy Connolly type of character who he just wanted to do what was right and get it done with, and not waste any time with all stupid plans and ideas, and really had no patience for anyone who would waste his time. He was the surly, grumpy one, but he was the one who kind of came up with the plans and who motivated the group to move forward. The other player, who was playing a more of a fighter type, started to become the negotiator for the group. And then our healer, who was a bard, she knew everybody and she'd engaged with the town beforehand, she became the pacifist who would calm down this angry, fiery dwarf, who would subtly soften the harsh negotiations of the fighter, and who would bring about a balance to this particular party. Now, this happened all organically, and I was reflecting on it going, that's fantastic. I've had other parties where it's people who've known each other for years coming together with characters, and that just not gelling together into a cohesive role-playing party. I'm fairly certain that the three of us could have carried on role-playing for the next 6 months, the next year, with those pre-generated characters, and we would have had a lot of fun because we just clicked. Now, what was it that got us to click? Well, I think it's because each of us followed the lead of the other. None of us said, right, we are a party and this is how we're going to operate. It just emerged. And instead of fighting it, instead of trying to steal the limelight from one another, instead of trying to force our own agenda, we simply rolled with the punches. So when the fighter started to negotiate for more money from the person who was hiring us to go and get these mushrooms, both myself and the fellow player who was playing the bard stood back and allowed the fighter to do his thing. And then, subsequently, whenever there was any kind of negotiations, both of us would automatically turn to the fighter and say, well, it's your space, this is what you do. Both of us, the fighter and myself, however, would take command from the female bard when she would tell us to calm down. We might grumble and growl, but ultimately we would calm down. We would settle back because she had given that order. There was no fighting for power. There was simply a respect of each of our characters and what they were expressing. And it was, for me, a great moment to look and say, here are two other people that I don't know very well. I know them a bit better now, and I hope to know them better in the future. But here are two people that just work because of allowing each other to fill in a gap, to fill in a space that allows the story to move forward, but that creates these fantastic moments. Now, something else that happened during the adventure was the original adventuring group that we had just crashed into. The one character, the one player, was playing this obnoxious, know-it-all young wizard who was awestruck by these three almost hardened veterans who had now joined their party. But in true young genius space, he was immediately cast as the character who was told to shut up all the time. And true to form, that's what happened. Again, he rolled with the punches, and instead of getting upset and hurt that we kept telling his character shut up, he would try and force more situations to happen where his character was told to shut up even more. And it made it even better. So again, it's about not taking things personally. It's about looking at the narrative and going, yes, this is what's going to make it better. And let me tell you, that session ended up running for 9 hours, and we had an absolute blast because of this give and take and this movement around that. Now, again, on that subject of respecting of others' characters, we had a barbarian played by a very soft-spoken young lady, but who did a fantastic job. We came across these 3 wolves that had been chained up to a pillar, and my character immediately said, oh, we've got to get rid of those wolves. I'm not going to have them coming up behind us and eating us whilst we're inside the cave. Well, this barbarian would have none of that. And she said, no, I don't think we should kill them at all. I think we should either leave them or we just shouldn't kill them. Now, I could have simply ignored her and tried to kill the wolves, and sadly, that is what happened. However, because my character respected her character, because she had proven herself in battle, I tried to think of a way that these wolves could be saved without being killed, but could also be removed from the table in terms of being a threat. On my character sheet, I happened to have a set of manacles. So I thought, well, all right, fine, let's try and go this approach. So all I did was charge into the room, foolishly, and try and grab the chains that they were chained up on, and then manacle them together, so that if they were ever released by their owner, they would still be chained together, which would hopefully render them almost impossible to be used in combat. Well, needless to say, my character nearly got ripped to pieces. He nearly died, but the rest of the party came into his aid and that sort of thing. So sadly, ultimately, the wolves had to be slain because, well, they just didn't understand that we were trying to keep them alive, damn it. We just wanted to chain them up. The point of the matter is that the counter was made that much more memorable. It wasn't just a hack and slash because we were trying to respect the wishes of another player's character without just dismissing it out of hand. And I think, again, that is something that has made it a much stronger experience and one that allowed it to go on for so long and to continue to be a source of enjoyment and merriment. Then I got to run a game, and two gentlemen joined us, Steve and Rob, who'd made time in their calendar to come through and to participate in the game that I ran. What was interesting in that game was that I had tried to write an encounter that was mysterious, that had a big mystery to it that the party would have to try and unravel and solve, and I'd given the characters a solid backstory, and each of them had their own backstories, but I had made sure that they started as unknowns. They did not know each other. I wanted to explore the relationship of these individuals who had very different and very dark pasts coming together to try and solve a collective mystery. However, what happened was, as the game master, I failed to help that cohesion come together. I thought that putting them through one type of stressful situation would unite them and bring them into a cohesive unit. That didn't happen, and when they got to this mysterious city where the riddle was supposed to unfold, they were floundering. They were lost in terms of how they should proceed as a group because they couldn't see a reason as to why they would work together. Now, the fault all lies with myself. I wrote the module and I wrote the characters, so I should have anticipated that they wouldn't have come together as neatly as I had hoped. And subsequently, I have gone back and rewritten the module to give them more reason to work together and less reason to split apart once they got to the City of Riddles and had no real need to solve the riddle. And I hope that that will make up for what happened. Having said that, though, we all had a lot of fun. At least I hope so. It certainly seemed to be the case. And once we got over that obstacle, the adventure then proceeded along smoothly and the riddle played itself out. It was a lot of fun and a good learning experience for myself to never underestimate the difficulty of bringing disparate people together and getting them to move forward. It was something that I needed to be reminded of, that it's not just as easy as putting a bunch of people in a room and giving them a traumatic experience. There needs to be more to it. And it's a finesse that I think is something that all of us can continue working on. That was all the time that I really had whilst I was there. In New York, I met up with some wonderful, wonderful people and had some fantastic conversations, but I didn't get to play. Where it just wasn't enough time. So that's my experience of role-playing in the West Coast and central parts of the USA. It was a hell of a lot of fun. It was so exciting to see how people have used this information from the channel or not and have never seen the channel, and how they brought their personal stamp onto role-playing, and yet how someone from the other side of the planet in a different hemisphere can come along, sit down at the table with complete strangers, and for several hours just get lost in this amazing fantasy world and have created memories that are as real as the other experiences I had whilst running across the States. They are as real to me as those experiences and will be with me until hopefully the day I die. And I think that's something that we can really appreciate with our game. I didn't have enough time to spend with all of the fans out there, and I met some people in passing through doorways as we were going from one amazing gaming store to another, and I wish I could have actually had more time, but unfortunately it just didn't work out that way. It seems like 2 weeks is just not enough. Anyway, I hope that some of these stories have been interesting and that some of the insights have been useful and something that you might reflect and look upon yourself and bring to your own table and just derive just that much more fun out of this most remarkable hobby of ours. So once again, to everybody that I met and chatted to in the USA, thank you so very much for giving me a little bit of your time and for sharing a little part of your world with me. Until next time, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Join us on Patreon for adventure modules and maps and all kinds of things that get given out every month. And if you haven't seen The Adventures of the Windswift yet, it's a role-playing session that I run with players from literally all over the world. We have an American, we've got a Brit, we've got a German, we've got an Australian, we've got me from South Africa, and we get together and we have just a lot of fun running around in the world of Braxia and exploring that. So if you haven't checked it out, head on over to Bacon RPG, our sister channel, and you'll find it there. And there's all sorts of other interesting things on the cards coming out from How to Be a Great GM. If you haven't joined us on Twitter, How2GM is our handle, hashtag How2GM, and you can join us there where I start to engage and ask all kinds of questions and things, and everyone can respond and participate, and it's a lot faster. We're also on Facebook, of course, and you can find us there on How to Be a Great GM and join us and have conversations and chat and ask questions and just generally have a great time. Until next time, however, I wish you and yours the happiest of gaming.